One of the reasons that we were so anxious to cement this partnership was because of the leadership of Stephanie Spears and her capacity for grassroots organizing, and the fact that all of you are out here today in this tent on a freezing cold rain with the mayor and councilmen and all these other great dignitaries is a testament to that, to her capacity to do that. She really is she's a force of nature. And we're really, John Adams, who is the founder of NRDC, told me many, many years ago, 30 years ago, when I first launched my career in environmental advocacy, that the hardest thing for anybody to do was grassroots organizing. And the entire environmental movement was built originally by grassroots organizers, people from the union movement, people from the churches, and from the student movement of the 60s, people like Dennis Hayes. And those were the people who really changed our country. And and it started here, it started on the Cuyahoga River, and we still, and I'm glad to be back here, and I'm glad for the leadership of Mayor Jackson, who I met through my friend Tim Hagan, who's not here today, and make sure to tell him I gave him a plug even though he didn't show up for this press conference. But Mayor Jackson, like Stephanie, understands that we're not protecting the environment so much for the sake of the fishes and the birds. We're protecting it because we recognize that nature is the infrastructure of our communities, and that if we want to meet our obligation as a generation, as a civilization, as a nation, which is to create communities for our children that provide them with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health as the communities that our parents gave us, we've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public lands, the things that those assets that are not susceptible to private property ownership, but by their nature are the assets of the entire community, what we call the commonwealth, or the commons, or the public trust assets, the landscapes that connect us to our past, to our history, that provide context to our communities, and that are the source ultimately of our values and our virtues and our character as a people. And these are people who understand that if you listen to the Tea Party activists and these other, and the polluters and their other kind of indentured servants in our political process, and their constant refrain is that, we have to choose between environmental protection on the one hand and economic prosperity on the other. And that is a false choice, as Mayor Jackson understands. In 100% of the situations, good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy. If we want to measure our economy, and this is how we ought to be measuring it, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the generation, over the long term, and how it preserves the value of the assets of our community. If, on the other hand, we want to do what the polluters and their sock puppets would like us to do, which is to treat the planet as if it were a business in liquidation, convert our natural resources to cash as quickly as possible, have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, we can generate an instantaneous cash flow and the illusion of a prosperous economy, and we can make a few billionaires by making everybody else poor. But our children are going to pay for our joyride, and they're going to pay for it with denuded landscapes and poor health and huge cleanup costs that are going to amplify over time and that they will never be able to pay. Environmental injury is deficit spending. It's a way of loading the costs of our generation's prosperity onto the backs of our children. And one of the things that I've done over the past 30 years as an environmental advocate is to constantly go around and confront this argument that an investment in our environment is a diminishment of our nation's wealth. It doesn't diminish our wealth. It's an investment in infrastructure. The same as investing in telecommunications or road construction. It's an investment we have to make if we're going to ensure the economic vitality of our generation and future generations. Now, Stephanie's talents are what we need in the environmental movement today. We're seeing that on Wall Street, on the Occupy Wall Street movement. We're seeing it with the Arab Spring. People are understanding we are losing our democracy. in this country. We're losing it because of the outsized power oftentimes of corporations. And I love corporations, and I love free market capitalism. And corporations are, an important driver of the marketplace. The marketplace is a tool. It's not a god. And it has to serve a public purpose. And corporations are a great thing because they encourage people to accumulate wealth, to assemble wealth, and then to risk it. And they create jobs and prosperities. But they should not be running our government. Because corporations don't want the same thing for America as Americans want. Corporations don't want democracy. They don't want free markets. They want profits. That's how we design them. It's not because they're bad. That's what we made them to do, to serve shareholder value. And if you let them into government, then the best thing that they can do with the surplus dollar at the end of the year is to invest it into our campaign finance system, which is just a system of legalized bribery. And so that they can get their hooks into a public official and use that official to dismantle the marketplace and give them a competitive edge or monopoly control, and then to privatize the commons, to steal the fish from the Cuyahoga River that belong to the Constitution of the state of Ohio. The fish of the state belong to the people of the state. They don't belong to the corporations. They don't belong to the governor. They don't belong to the legislature. Every child in this city, whether they're black or white or rich or poor or humble or noble, has an absolute right to go down to that river and pull out a fish and bring it home and feed it proudly to their family with the security that they're not going to poison somebody. But that right has been stolen from the people of Ohio. Today, every freshwater fish in the state of Ohio now has a fishery advisory saying that it is dangerous at some level to eat. So we're living in a science fiction nightmare today, where my children in New York and virtually every child in Ohio can now no longer engage in the seminal primal activity of American youth, which is to go fishing with their father and mother in the local fishing hole and then come home and safely eat the fish. And it's because the control that the polluters have on the political process in our country. And the only way, and this is what Occupy Wall Street understands, is the only way that we're going to take that back is through grassroots activism. And it's so critical, and I remember what it was like before Earth Day 1970. I remember when they declared Lake Erie dead. I remember that I couldn't swim in the Hudson or the Charles or the Potomac when I was growing up. When I was a little boy, I was interested in hawks and falcons, and I used to visit my uncle. In fact, when I was 10 years old, I wrote my uncle, President Kennedy, and I said I wanted to meet with him about pollution and the environment. And he brought me to the Oval Office. And I said I wanted to write a book about pollution, and he arranged for me to meet. I met with him at the Oval Office, and I gave him a little salamander that I had caught that morning, and then he arranged for me to meet with Stuart Udall and with other members of his administration, and I interviewed them all on a reel-to-reel tape recorder. I never actually got around to writing the book until I was 29. I remember what it was like in Washington D.C. when your shirt got dirty from the smog. People were sick. We had thousands of people dying every year in American cities because of smog events. These young, Tea Party people on Capitol Hill don't remember that today. They don't see the benefits that we've gotten through our investment in our environmental infrastructure. But the crowning milestone of all of these insults to the environment took place right here. This was the beginning of the environmental movement in our country, which was the modern environmental movement, which was when the Cuyahoga River burned. And Americans said that we've had enough. And 20 million Americans took to the streets, 10% of our population, the largest public demonstration in the history of our country, demanding that our political leadership return to the American people the ancient environmental rights that had been stolen from the American citizens during the previous 80 years, because these are ancient rights. There's never been a right to pollute. It's in the Magna Carta, it's in the Code of Justinian, that the waterways belong to the public, the fisheries belong to the public, everybody has a right to use them. Nobody can use them in a way that will diminish or injure their use and enjoyment by others, and it's in the Constitution of every state, including Ohio. But through political clout and influence, the polluters have been able to subvert those laws and steal the air from our children's lungs, steal the fish from our rivers, privatize the commons to make private profit by taking public assets, public trust assets, and turning them into cash for themselves. And the American people said, we've had enough, and Republicans and Democrats got together, and it frightened the political establishment. And President Nixon created EPA. Over the next 10 years, we passed 28 major environmental laws in this country that restored these ancient environmental rights. And industry, ever since then, for the past 42 years, has worked overtime trying to subvert and diminish those laws. You know, the Clean Water Act has a guarantee that all pollution will have ceased in this country by 1984. It's in the preamble to the act that every fish in America, every waterway in America has to be fishable and swimmable and drinkable by 1984. Those are the guarantees of that federal statute. We don't have that today. And it's because the power, because wherever you see large-scale environmental injury, you'll also see the subversion of democracy. You'll see the capture of the agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution. You'll see the corruption of public officials, of judges and politicians. You'll see the corruption of the press. And you'll see the destruction of democracy on the local basis, where people can no longer participate in the decisions over the destinies of their communities. And all of those things happen at the behest of the power of the big polluters.